Welcome to Trust the Badge. In this episode, I interview Sheriff Dennis Lemma, the Sheriff for Seminole County, Florida. He shares his extensive views about building trust between law enforcement and the community and his community policing efforts that have led to great results and great success, which ultimately needs to be implemented in those municipalities that are not doing very well because of Defund the Police movements. Please enjoy our great conversation, and we will start off with Sheriff Lemma introducing himself.
It's great to be with you today. My name is Dennis Lemma, and I am currently the Sheriff of Seminole County, Florida. Again, I'm the 10th sheriff in the past 110-year history of the county. And I have been a veteran member of the office, essentially starting as a correctional officer close to 32 years ago, and working as a correctional officer, a deputy sheriff, an investigator, a sergeant, a lieutenant, a captain, a major, and serving as chief deputy before I was first elected to sheriff. I am now finishing up my second term as sheriff and getting ready to run for my third term. So still a lot of work left to be done. In addition to that, I am the president of an organization called Major County Sheriffs of America. It represents the largest sheriff's offices in the United States. There's about 110 sheriffs that represent 100 million U.S. population. And it gives me unique access to have conversations with the White House staff, Department of Justice staff, Secretary Mayorkas, FBI Director Christopher Wray, on important policing issues that affect us across the country. So again, a pleasure to be with you, and thank you so much for all that you do.
So thank you for being here. That sounds like quite the resume. So just to start off the interview, what encouraged you to become a law enforcement officer?
Well, I think I was first inspired as a young child. As I would watch television shows and programs, I always had this disdain for the bully. I would see programs that would have a bunch of bullies circling around a student on a schoolyard, taking their money from them. And I knew that moved me at a young age.
Oh,
And
wow.
I think right around the time that I was old enough to know that superheroes did not exist, that there was no like a formal process that you could not like wear a cape and fly and save people. I think I was called to a profession that comes as close to replicating that as you possibly can in a modern society. And I think that that's what originally attracted me to enlist and serve in the United States Marine Corps, and then ultimately become a policing professional here at the Seminole County Sheriff's Office.
Wow. This is one of the most unique stories I've had on the podcast. So thank you for sharing that. And in your law enforcement career, what were your main duties as a deputy?
Well, I think that the main duty, as fundamentally as you can put it, it is to protect and preserve human life. And I think that sometimes the policing profession is underestimated based on what common terminology is. I'll give you an example. That law enforcement officer rolls pretty easily off the tongue. And in my opinion, it is just a fraction of what we are actually responsible day in and day out. Clearly, enforcing the laws is a significant part of the work that we do, but a more accurate description of the services that we provide centers around policing. Policing represents being one with the community and recognizing that partnering with other stakeholders, law-abiding citizens, to be ambassadors of everything that is good and just in a particular community is so incredibly important. In addition to that, sometimes rehabilitation or habilitation starts with the apprehension and arrest and the protection of citizens. So at least in the case here at the Seminole County Sheriff's Office, people are surprised to learn that we are in the top 1% of employers in Seminole County, with a workforce of nearly 1,500 members and an annual operating budget of about $185 million a year. We do things that are non-traditional, like, we run our correctional facility where we rehabilitate offenders and habilitate them. We run our juvenile probation component in code enforcement, and out of the nearly 1,500 members, people are surprised to learn that we have probably 800 civilian members. So it's a whole host of things, from traffic enforcement and investigations and SWAT and tactical operations, and all of these things that I think are oftentimes sensationalized about the business, but much, much more than that. Nurturing relationships with adolescents and in our school safety program, providing crime prevention tips to neighborhood associations, and the list goes on and on. Or an easy way to describe it is, when the ball rolls between everyone else's legs, it typically ends up on our doorstep, and people trust that we know what to do to make their lives better with it.
You bring up some really great points, Sheriff. Thank you very much for sharing them. And as you mentioned the community and how your sheriff department has helped so much, shifting towards that topic, how has the community's relationship with the sheriff's department changed from your time as a deputy to now as the sheriff?
I think it's an ongoing process of embracing a relationship of trust and confidence. And it starts with a cycle that really has three distinct metrics. One, I think that there's this expectation of the public that we're going to be open and transparent. Sometimes that means increased communications. So as time has evolved, not only during my time here at the sheriff's office, and my predecessor did just such a remarkable job with serving as a trailblazer in this space of community policing, but I think it's like never done. I work a lot with leadership guru and author Simon Sinek. We've created a police foundation together, and one of the things that he's written about and he's spoken about is this book, The Infinite Game. And what you find about policing, there is no winning policing. Like, it doesn't matter how long you serve. And, when you have some of these games and activities, that there's winners and there's losers, and there's a set amount of time, and there's a scoreboard that indicates that there is no winning and losing. And I think that when you look at policing in a pre 9/11 world, it looks entirely different in a post 9/11 world, where you're doubling down on domestic security concerns and data collection and analysis. But I think in the most fundamental way, it has been always based upon a relationship between uh, the people who provide policing services and the citizens and the communities that they serve. And what we've found over the years is the people who are closest to the problems are usually the best suited individuals to give recommendations on what's happening. And I think that we foster that, we capitalize on that, and ultimately greater communication evolves into the second measurable area, and that's relationships. And then, if done right in the communication and relationship building, then evolves into trust. And I think that that's where we're at now with our community. Our community trusts us, and they have confidence in us. And when we saw poor examples of communities turning on their police in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, we did not experience that here. We have as much love and consideration and support as what we ever have had here in Seminole County.
That's really good to hear that the community here really supports your sheriff's department, and the community here in general has a really good and tight relationship, because many police departments around the world, especially just in the US after the George Floyd riots, many were defunded, many had to undergo police officer turnover rates. And it was just overall a really bad situation for all police that were affected. So it really does show how great and tightly knit the community is here. And in terms of community policing initiatives, how involved have you been with those initiatives during your time as sheriff?
Well, I think that not only is my time as sheriff, my time throughout my career here, I've been a strong ambassador of that. I actually
Absolutely.
wrote our community policing policy many years ago. And as I was ascending the ranks, I would actually teach concepts and theories like fixing broken windows, which is a community blight theory that suggests that if windows are broken in a particular community, unless those windows are repaired, it has a greater likelihood for other windows to become broken. Or a more sophisticated way to say that is incivility in a particular community that goes unaddressed and untouched has the ability to court in larger criminal acts because it gives the impression that nobody really cares about what's going on. But that concept, the concept of crime prevention through environmental design, where we have strategically provided recommendations on new constructions and development. The long and short is the most significant thing that we can do about crime is to prevent it from occurring in the first place. Or in layman's terms, it's crime prevention's job to keep enforcement out of business. Now we have an inability to over sensationalize the arrest and apprehension, right? That's what they write books about. They make motion pictures. They have a lot of successful television series about the arrest and apprehension of the offenders. But the couple stats that I think are incredibly important to remember is there's a small percentage of the offender population that is responsible for a large percentage of the crime. And that, of course, we have to focus in on and apprehend them and try to do all that we can to change their behavior. So if they're ultimately released back out in society, they're not committing the same offenses over again. Another aspect of that, in the spirit of community policing, is there's a small percentage of victims that are responsible for nearly 42% of all victimization that occurs in our community. And these are people that are walking out of the gas station, walking back to their car or walking away from their car, leaving it running, and they're going inside the gas station for a couple of minutes, and they're surprised to learn that their car is taken when they come out. Or the person may be going to their local gym or retail store and leaves their purse or their wallet or their computer bag in plain view on the seat. Now, in many of these regards, there's been no violation of law, but we know that informing the public helps us in our overall strategy to prevent crime from occurring in the first place. I think it is the benchmark of policing in this country, and it was taken from those fundamental concepts from Sir Robert Peel in early England concepts of being one with the people who have an interest in making their communities better.
That's a really great strategy. And to be honest, that needs to be used more often and definitely other places. I believe that community relationships for your sheriff's department is really good and it's really been proven as well. And speaking of this really good relationship, how do you plan to build and even maintain it in the future?
Well, I think that, when you have a community, it's an ever changing environment, right? I think it's incredibly important that any person who is serving in a policing profession, especially those that are leading the agencies, have to understand and recognize that every single day you're working to build and establish trust and confidence. And it's just not the relationships that you build over time. And let's face it, I mean, a lot of people are leaving these states that have turned against their police and have allowed for pockets of lawlessness to occur because they want to relocate to Florida, because they want to be a part of this holistic support and appreciation of the men and women that are actually out there serving. So I
Right.
think fostering relationships with them is important, but inevitably there's going to be times where things don't go your way. And there's times where members of agency and the policing profession need to be held accountable. And I think that by holding people accountable, knowing that there's a high standard of this profession that we have to keep and maintain, is something that again builds credibility with the citizens that we serve any day. I think that you can do a Google search at any police department or sheriff's office across this country and see that there's a lot of positive things going on. And I think that you can tell a lot about a a person and organization on how swiftly we take accountability and remove things that are harmful, whether it's the police officer that does something wrong, or if it's an initiative that we want to use our political capital to reject. I think that there's a lot that goes on to this work, and it's not just the community, it's also stakeholders. Like here in Seminole County, we have 7 municipalities, 7 cities, and 8 police departments. And just this morning, I had the opportunity to attend our monthly meeting with all of the chiefs of police. And one of the things that I said to them as we come into, I don't know when this will be aired, but we're just prior to Thanksgiving here. I said, as we're giving thanks for a lot of different things, I always take this time to share with my colleagues how thankful I am of them at the local, state, and federal level, of the relationships that we have created and the chemistry that we provide for our community. And I think that that's a fundamental expectation that our citizens have, is that their leaders, their elected leaders, their public officials are getting along and doing all that they can to advance a common interest and just cause.
Thank you, Sheriff. In terms of the view of law enforcement today, what do you believe are the most significant challenges facing law enforcement in our community today, and how do you plan to address them?
Well, I think we first start with something that you mentioned earlier in the podcast is, we saw, after the George Floyd situation, we saw people turning and creating a narrative that were like
Right.
defund the police. And we also saw some extreme things like out in some far Western states where they had areas and parts of the cities that they completely turned over to the law violators. There was total and complete lawlessness that were going on in those areas. But I think the first step is to identify who those people are that were advocating for defund the police. Now, candidly, I'm an elected official and I run in a partisan race, or I am a Republican, but I make it a point to tell people that I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, not of sound mind or political ideology to proclaim where you stand. We serve all people. And I think it's important to really embrace that concept in a world and in a country that seems like we're always divided on something, religion and politics and other things. But when you look at these people that were behind the defund the police effort, the largest percentage of the people that were behind the defund the police effort simply have no idea what we do. These are people that would be indoctrinated, and they would attend a community police academy, and they would oftentimes walk away and say, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea that you guys were doing so much and investing so much in crime prevention and awareness and education." And a majority of them, if they had the opportunity to experience and actually see what goes on behind the scenes, I think that they would be okay with what we're doing and change that narrative that they had. The other
Oh,
percent
absolutely.
of the people are people who are advocating for defunding the police. These folks are absolutely nuts. They want disorder. They want lawlessness. They don't want any authority. And to be candid with you, they are incredibly dangerous to our society, right? But I think that they're a smaller portion of the people who fit in that category. I will tell you what I think we need to do is police officers, especially ones holding senior leadership positions, should not buy into the hype that citizens don't appreciate and support their police. To the contrary, they absolutely do, in my experience. When you look at, if you polled right now, news media, politicians, and police based upon favorability, by far, police would come out on top. And some of the problem is if police executives start to say, we're underappreciated, nobody likes us, which again, simply is not true, then it no longer attracts good, honest, wholesome people that want to serve, to stand in the gap between good and evil, to take on this career. Because in the pure sense, we do attract people who want to serve above self.
I completely agree. And as we've seen before, after the George Floyd protests, many police departments faced much criticism, even ones across the nation. And it was really sad to see that many officers truly didn't want to keep their jobs anymore. Many of them quit their jobs. Many of them just simply didn't want to be involved with this profession where nobody wanted to support them. And in the case, it was mostly the governments. But now, especially in this community of Central Florida, we see that we have a really strong bond and really strong connection. And that's really something I hope that could be fostered elsewhere. But in your opinion, what other specific common misconception does the community have about law enforcement that needs to be changed? For example, if law enforcement is malevolent in any way.
Yeah, I think that when you look at it, I always encourage people to attend the community law enforcement academies or participate in these programs and opportunities that are made available to citizens. And I think it does a couple of things. One, it allows you to really see behind the curtain of the good work that the men and women of policing are doing every single day. And then two, it allows us to build a unique and personal relationship with people that are participating, and they become solid ambassadors and they tell all their friends about what we're doing. But I think that overwhelmingly, like, we've had a program for more than 25 years. I just spoke the other day at a recent graduation for our 88th class that we've had here, and I've been there for every single one of them. But everyone walks out from different backgrounds, different walks of life, feeling so reassured of the services that are offered. And always on the first night of that class, I say, you're going to walk away. And one of the things that you will say to me at the end of this 12 weeks is how incredibly impressed you are with the passion of the men and women that are serving in a variety of positions. So what I think some misconceptions are is quite frankly, we shape our narrative sometimes of the policing profession based on what we see on television. And that could be through motion pictures and various television shows that thinks that it's as easy to solve a crime by wrapping up a significant homicide case in a couple of days with digital and forensic evidence. It's typically not that easy. I mean, we do a pretty good job, but it's not condensed and fit in a 30-minute show. I think that the local news, although they have served as pretty good partners for us, I'm talking about the local news, right? They
Right.
they have a limited amount of time to show people what's going on, and that typically centers around the arrest and apprehension. But every time you see what we call a perp walk or a bad guy in handcuffs or a bad girl in handcuffs, every time you see that, I mean, there are hours and hours and hours of work that go behind that. And typically after that, there's a significant effort to ensure that that person, the victim, is provided a level of sustainability, that whatever the crime was, the opportunity to commit that crime is not going to happen again. And, whenever appropriate, while the person is incarcerated or in the correctional facility, that some tension and effort is spent on fixing whatever the behavior is. Because if somebody is arrested for breaking into your car that lives down the street from you, I think that you have a fundamental expectation as a law-abiding citizen that surely whatever's broken is going to be fixed by the time that person is released from jail. Lastly, I think that you find the policing officials, especially sheriffs, leading one of the largest mental health facilities in any county. In Seminole County, the John E. Polk Correctional Facility is a 1,400 bed facility, and a high percentage of the population on the inside of there suffers from some form of a mental health condition. And what we've done is we've re-engineered our programs and strategies to make sure that we can provide adequate health care to address those underlying conditions, whether it's substance use disorder, dependency on these substances, or mental health conditions. Because if we can get them back out and to be productive members of society, if we can make them become moms and dads and brothers and sisters again, then we're doing something good for our community. And then lastly, because I am a conservative, that if we don't fix what's broken with the people who are incarcerated and down this path, there's more than a 30% likelihood that their children will engage in maladaptive behavior. Or another way to put that, we raise generations of families on our tax dollars if we don't fix what's broken.
I completely agree, Sheriff. And I'm really glad that you touch on these issues. And I really believe that these issues need to be known more. I'm really glad that you really care about the community and how their community can recover after time. But you touched on this topic a little bit. I just want to specify more. In your opinion, what specific scenarios put law enforcement on the downside when projected by the media?
Well, I think that, when you look at the fact that there's more than 800,000 policing officials in this country, an overwhelming number. I mean, 99.9% of them are doing such honorable work. I mean, they are sacrificing their lives in some cases and their families to do noble work. I mean, they literally are walking the thin blue line, or figuratively walking the thin blue line to protect our domestic and international freedom and asking for very, very little in return. I think what happens sometimes is inevitably in any organization where you have 800,000, you're going to get a bad egg that squeaks through the process. And there are some people that don't deserve to be in the policing profession. And I think that as the leaders of major agencies and major organizations across the country, when we see people doing something like that, we denounce it quickly. We say that this person and their behavior do not represent the norms, values, and customs of our profession. But I think that sometimes some media sources can over sensationalize that to make that look like it's the narrative of what's going on in every single agency, in every single community, and it's widespread. And in more than 31 years in this business, I can tell you with a great level of confidence that that simply is not true. These are noble men and women that are out there standing in the gap to protect the sheep from the wolf. And what I get concerned about is the people who serve in policing. Look, they're gonna give back. They're gonna have a calling and a profession where they feel that they're standing up against the bully. They are going to serve. But if we as a society don't continue to lift up because of pressures of national media or national narrative, like some people will repeat what's going on in Seattle like it's occurring up the road. And quite frankly, I don't have too many friends that are in Seattle. I don't run into people from Seattle. And granted, they can do some nutty things out there and they can treat their police in a way that I think is not representative of all of the folks that are in this profession and quite frankly communities across the country. I think that what Governor DeSantis has done, as well as his cabinet, right? I work very closely with him, First Lady Casey DeSantis, Florida's Attorney General Ashley Moody. I mean, we've attracted people to move into the state of Florida, not because, although he's given a $5,000 incentive to relocate and we've expedited the process of the training equivalency. I think the biggest selling point that we have here in Florida is people that work in the policing profession want to serve a community that actually appreciates them. And I think that sometimes these narrative of bad examples can be over sensationalized to make it feel like it's more widespread than what it actually is.
Sheriff, as someone who tries to change the perception of law enforcement today, one of the worst things I've ever heard of that has really put law enforcement on the downside is, of course, defund the police. But usually that comes from the small percentage of police officers from various departments that sincerely do not represent any of the values at those police department and does not represent the rest of the police department at all. And they are the ones that really cause this outrage. And I don't believe that this should continue any longer. It really does frustrate me that other law enforcement officers across the country have to feel the burden of their communities when just one officer from somewhere else, as in your example, Seattle, did something and now some other officer hundreds of miles away has to experience the burden from their community. So to me, that is just saddening.
But
But
what's
of course,
interesting is
Mhm.
they've now changed their position on that. They
Really?
see they see this skyrocketing crime in major cities across
Oh, yes.
America.
Yeah.
I was just up in 2 weeks ago in Secretary Mayorkas's office having a conversation with him about the southern border. Just last week, I had a Zoom meeting with FBI Director Chris Wray. I have direct communication with my role as president of Major County Sheriffs of America. But what's happening is a lot of these incredibly politically minded, extreme liberal people that felt like defunding the police was the way to go are now seeing skyrocketing violent crime occurring in their communities, and they're repositioning themselves, and they're no longer moving forward with that same narrative in many of the spaces, not all of them, but a lot of these folks that, I know personally. I knew the chief in Philadelphia that wasn't able to get body cameras because they had to funnel it through a different fund. I mean, everybody should want the technology and advancement of body cameras, but they wouldn't do it because it gave the perception that they were funding the police. And I know it was incredibly frustrating for her. And Philadelphia's a big city, big police department.
I do like to mention, though, the numbers as well. In, I believe, Burlington, Vermont, the police department had to be defunded after the George Floyd protests. And since then, the amount of police officers they had dropped within an instant. And as you can tell, and as you mentioned as well, those governments, they were scrambling. I mean, they had no police officers, they had no one to serve their communities and protect their communities. And as a result, the crime rate specifically there skyrocketed by 15%. So of course the mayor, the city government had to do something about it. And now we're seeing how the entire term is reversed in those counties and in those cities and municipalities. The fact that the police are now being funded. So we've seen some very positive feedback from what was an initially negative response to the defund the police movement.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to mention that this is the distinct difference between a police department, a police chief, and the elected sheriff. So as a constitutional officer, the elected sheriff only has one boss, and that's the people that they serve. So this is why you can turn on whatever national news organization you watch, see a sheriff in full uniform doing and saying anything that they want to do or say. And, part of the state constitution in each one of these states outlines the job description of what the sheriff is. And part of that is to be the chief law enforcement officer of the county, to be the chief administrative and executive officer of the circuit and county courts, and conservator of the peace. So for me, quite frankly, although we've got fabulous working relationships, and this would have never occurred here in Seminole County, but when I evaluate how some cities in major counties across America have allowed for total lawlessness because they were defunded, the sheriffs of those counties should have fulfilled their responsibility to the people and the Constitution and took over primary policing services within those areas to ensure there was never an interruption of services. So again, it's an important distinction. And the last thing we have here is to run the county correctional facility, but that's not afforded by the Constitution. That's based on the relationship we have with our board of county commissioners. But that's what's great about being a sheriff is you can say anything that you want to say as long as it's not illegal or unethical. You just may not be able to say it for more than 4 years because people are going to vote for you during that process.
Right. And honestly, it seems like you're doing a really good job at it. Thank you for being a great sheriff in this county. The people here really need you. And of course, what you support. So we covered on the topics of why defunding law enforcement is such a bad idea. But taking a look at it, should there be more funding for law enforcement?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's what you're seeing here in the state of Florida with the DeSantis administration. I think year
Right.
after year, he has prioritized in the state budget incentives for police officers. I know for now 3 years in a row, he and our leadership and our legislative body at the Senate president level and the Speaker of the House level, they've always prioritized rewarding the men and women of public service. Just over the last couple of months, Governor DeSantis has given all police officers a $1,000 bonus Again, he's done that now for 3 years in a row. He has worked with his team in the legislature to ensure that state law enforcement officers are more adequately compensated for the work. And when they raised what the starting salary of state correctional officers, state police officers, highway patrolmen, and women are getting, I think it's so incredibly important. So I think that not only we're showing love and support here across the state of Florida, I think that we're leading the way. And sometimes when I talk to the governor, I'll tell him that we are the envy of policing officials from across this country, based upon how we're not defunding, but we're proactively funding the police, whether it's through the $5,000 incentive to relocate to the state of Florida, whether it's the police officer bonuses that have been given out now 3 years in a row. Oh, and by the way, I don't know that that's ever been done in our history. I think that we have a lot going on, and funding the police is absolutely what we're doing on a state level. And at a local level, the county, our board of county commissioners have been solid ambassadors of my budget request every single year. We've got 5 county commissioners. All of them are very supportive of their police, but more particularly the sheriff's office. And it allows me to give salary adjustments that are commensurate with the work that's being done. I have not had one person ever have a conversation with me about defunding anything that we're doing.
That's really good to hear. And speaking of Governor DeSantis, he has helped law enforcement so much. Personally, I've actually met him about 4 times now. Second time actually being because of Trust the Badge. I actually got to speak to him about Trust the Badge, my mission, and he was really appreciative and he truly endorsed it. I was really proud that our governor of the state of Florida, he truly appreciates the work law enforcement does. And he really does understand that funding law enforcement is the answer. And as we can see in real life right now, more funding for law enforcement, providing these bonus checks helps law enforcement be here. We have more police officers now. And I believe that before Governor DeSantis, we were in a sort of a decline of law enforcement in Florida. And with what he's passed in Florida, it looks like he's been doing such a great job in maintaining the peace of law enforcement here and truly the community relationships. So that's a really great point.
I tell you from the beginning, I mean, both he and First Lady Casey DeSantis has been nonstop. I've had the opportunity to chair various councils and work with both of them directly on various initiatives from drug enforcement. But I'm telling you, they are all in and are incredibly passionate, not only about policing in this state, but our most vulnerable populations. I'll tell you, we've got a lot to be proud of, and I think that this momentum will actually continue. And let's face it, I mean, the $5,000 to relocate or the $1,000 bonus, I mean, that's not going to change somebody's life. But I tell you what it will do is it will let every single person that puts a badge and a gun on every single day know that their state appreciates the work that they do. And that goes so far.
Right. And we really need more of that, to be honest. I believe that we're probably one of the first states to do ever such a thing, if not the first. And if other states honestly adopt giving bonuses to law enforcement officers who join the force, they will see probably lower crime rates, better community relationships, and definitely less defund the police movements, because now we're seeing that law enforcement is being more integrated into the community. And honestly, both sides, the community and law enforcement, are happier. I believe that this will only move us forward.
It's not only him too, but the person on the cabinet that I've worked probably most closely with is Attorney General Ashley Moody. And as Florida's top cop, as a former prosecutor and former judge and wife to a federal law enforcement officer, I mean, on day one, she created an award called Back the Blue. And I mean, we're just aligned and set up in such a remarkable environment here with people who are using their voice and political capital to do our bidding out there in the community. And like you said, it is absolutely working.
I really hope other states adopt this policy, and it's making our community safer. That's the bottom line. It's making our community safer. We're having better law enforcement officers out there. And I believe that Governor DeSantis is truly leading our state when it comes to law enforcement. What message do you have for any current or future law enforcement listening to this interview? And how can they change their perspective of law enforcement in the future?
Well, I'll start with current law enforcement, and it is an incredibly demanding job. There's no doubt about it. And I don't know that any person who has ever advertised a position in policing have used the words easy, it's a cakewalk, it's no stress. I mean, people who are called to this profession, and I believe that people are called to this profession, know some of the sacrifices, know some of the commitments. I think that it is so important that we continue to be the best ambassadors about recruiting those people who we feel comfortable working with. And probably more importantly, those people who will ultimately succeed us, right? It's the generation that we have for tomorrow. If they learn from our mistakes, if they take our counsel, will continue to evolve the profession even beyond what we've been able to do, right? And again, many of us don't plan to retire for a very long time, but this process is a process that evolves over centuries, not decades. The second thing is for people that may be on the fence, wondering about, do I want to do this? You absolutely will have the backing and support of your police administration, your local sheriff, as we've talked about, your governor and your attorney general and your city council and your community. But most importantly, the people that you serve. The people that you serve will rally around you, support you, lift you up. And here in Central Florida, we still receive invitations to present during career day. People are not embarrassed to say my mom or my dad is in the policing profession. There's something that just changes the moment you put that uniform on and you realize that you are now a member of one of the greatest fraternities that has ever existed in this country. The people who are in these enforcement positions, that are in these policing professions. And a wise man told me that I've been repeating a handful of times over the past couple of weeks is cherish these moments, because there'll come a time we'll reflect back on them as the good old days. And that's something that should be a reminder for people who are serving now. And for the people who are coming in and evaluating, we're actually seeing a little bit of a shift where once upon a time, people that came into this job were doing 20, 25, and 30 years. And now we still have people that are doing that, but we also have people that are coming in and doing 4 and 5 years, similar to military service, learning some special skills and becoming incredibly marketable in the private sector. And many of them are going on and doing private sector work, but most of them are remaining reserve deputies and reserve officers and always keeping that passion that they have for the work that's done by the men and women of our agencies near and dear to their hearts.
Thank you for your kind words, Sheriff. And again, for any of you that are listening that are current law enforcement or considering law enforcement in the future, I just want to let you know that the state of Florida, of course, has your back. Many sheriff departments and police departments are strongly supported here in the state of Florida, and especially sheriffs like Sheriff Lemma here truly believe in the mission that law enforcement are the community and that law enforcement are truly here to support you. Please take that into account. So thank you to any of you that are listening. And Sheriff, ultimately, how do we trust the badge?
Well, I think that we are doing it right now. I think that we need more people demonstrating courage, demonstrating an ability to proclaim that the police are good, that they're good people that are actually behind the badge, right? The badge and the cars and the lights and the handcuffs are things that we see. But behind that badge, you see family members, husbands and wives and children and brothers and sisters. And when you look at the number of names that are added to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial in Judiciary Square, and you get a glimpse, and unfortunately, you never see this really on the news, right? you get a glimpse of those families that are grieving at these monuments and loved ones and children that are there. It's a true reflection of the sacrifice of these heroes that are out there protecting and preserving in our communities. I think that remaining plugged in, attending various police related opportunities, whether it's the community police academy, like we talked about, or serving on some citizen like advisory board or council, or just get plugged in is something that our community can do. And then for us, I think that we need to be steady as police officials. I think that we need to be reliable. I think that we constantly have to embrace the humility of that goes along with serving as an ambassador for other people. Other people trust us. They know that when they pick up that phone and they dial 911, they may not know who's coming, but they're pretty confident right now that whoever's going to show up is going to be on their side to handle whatever crisis and situation that they're handling. And I do feel as a career police officer, not only the sheriff, but as a career policing official, I do feel that we're trusted. I do feel that we're supported. And I am optimistic that tomorrow is going to be brighter than even the days that we have today, which are pretty dang good when you look at the state of Florida.
I really hope that message resonates with much of the audience. We really do need more support for the police, even though in our community, I believe we are very well off with what we have. We would like some more, to be honest. But in other parts of the country where many police departments do not have the same luxury as we do, there are many parts of the nation who are scrambling and who need police officers and who are really regretting the actions of movements such as Defund the Police. And I truly believe that more community outreach and trust will only help. Before we end the interview, do you have any final thoughts?
Yep. My final thoughts is, hey, let's do more of this. You go to college campuses and high school campuses, and it is incredibly sad that people are not as bold as what you've been. They are secretly offering their support to the men and women that are serving in this position, but when they get around their friends and others, they're not doing that. I think that sometimes academia can indoctrinate people into this misguided belief about what policing looks like in America. But if we stand strong, if we serve a voice, if we're willing to debate and have conversation about these topics, and sometimes coming from somebody like you that has an audience, that has a following, that has a passion for this, it comes across a little bit better than us presenting a self-serving argument that, hey, like us more. They're like, okay, of course you're asking us to like us more. But when it comes from people that are actually citizens that are out there, I tell people all the time, I said, in this country, you're very likely to get a finger if you work in the policing profession. In some areas that have gone absolutely radical, that they have hundreds of vacancies and crime skyrocketing, you're likely to get the middle finger. But here in the state of Florida, where we're experiencing a 50-year crime low, you're likely to get a thumb up. Lastly, these people who don't embrace the support for police and they should never get elected to office. If they're campaigning on a platform that wants to defund the police, I don't know that you can do something that is more dangerous than that. And our citizens should not elect those people, whether they're mayors or city council members or policing executives like sheriffs that don't say the things that we're talking about right now. They should never get an opportunity to serve in the position and have the job, in my opinion.
And again, for those of you out there, bottom line is we need to have less of defund the police movements. We need more support for law enforcement. And more than ever, this is a time where law enforcement needs the community as well. For any of you out there that are considering law enforcement or in current law enforcement, please take Sheriff Lena's words into consideration. And again, Sheriff, thank you so much for being here.
Well, keep up the great work and thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Trust the Badge.